Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're sort of clearing away the cliches,
Yeah.
but when surrounding the middle years,
hmm
forget the stereotype, the shiny new car, the sudden dramatic upheaval.
Right.
We're diving into the complex, often unseen reality of mental health during midlife. And, well, as the research shows, it seems less like a crisis and maybe more like a marathon.
That's a really good way to put it. And when we define this stage midlife, we're generally talking about people between, say, 40 and 64.
Okay.
But unlike, adolescence where you turn 18 or old age with pension eligibility.
Right, fixed points.
Exactly. The boundaries of midlife are much more fluid. They're shaped by social things, biological markers. Like when you start juggling aging parents and maybe launching kids out of the house, it's a huge chunk of life, potentially 2 decades or more.
Wow. So our mission today, then, is to understand why this massive stretch of time is so often linked with feeling, well, overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We're exploring how that unique mix of biological changes, these chronic stressors we hear about, and the shifting social roles, how they really impact your well-being during this period.
Precisely. And if we look at the overall pattern, mental health across the whole lifespan, the data does generally seem to confirm that feeling.
That feeling being, the middle years are just tougher.
The research often shows what's called the U-shaped pattern in well-being. Basically, people in midlife consistently report lower levels of well-being,
Or than who?
lower than both younger adults and older adults. And they report more frequent symptoms of distress, too.
Huh. That's
Mm.
that's quite a statement, that
Yeah.
people in their 40s and 50s are, demonstrably struggling more than other age groups. But I guess this isn't like a universal thing, one size fits all.
Oh, absolutely not. That's vital context, that U-shaped pattern. It isn't everywhere. It differs quite a bit across countries, even across different historical groups.
Like generations.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these symptoms seem more pronounced in certain cohorts, like the baby boomers, maybe, because of the specific economic and social pressures they faced. And of course, your socioeconomic status plays a massive role in whether you experience this dip at all.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, if lots of people are feeling this dip, this sustained lower well-being, maybe that explains why the culture grabs onto the midlife crisis idea.
It's a simple narrative.
We,
Yeah.
we need an easy explanation for maybe decades of struggle.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What's the actual reality, statistically speaking, behind that famous crisis?
Well, the reality is that the whole idea of a dramatic sudden crisis, like a lightning strike moment, it's really overblown.
How overblown?
Estimates suggest only about 10 to 20% of people in midlife actually report having what they themselves would call a crisis.
Wait, seriously, only like 1 or 2 out of 10? That seems incredibly low compared to, movies and books.
It is surprisingly low. And even when that kind of reassessment does happen, it's rarely some sudden break. It usually looks more like a sustained period of self-reflection.
Well,
People kind of stop and ask themselves, is this life I've built actually fulfilling me? And that often leads them to seek out opportunities that feel more personally satisfying. Sometimes that means making big changes, but usually slowly, intentionally.
And you can see hints of that in broader societal shifts, right? Like
Mhm.
the gray divorce rate doubling, people over 50 splitting up.
Exactly that. Or think about the Great Resignation after the pandemic. A lot of those folks were midlife adults looking at jobs, or maybe even marriages that just weren't rewarding anymore.
And deciding they didn't want to spend the next 20, 30 years like that.
Precisely. They're choosing fulfillment over just inertia. It feels more like a calculated risk,
Yeah.
not a sudden panic attack.
That makes sense. Calculated change versus sudden breakdown.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try and categorize the things fueling that widespread dip in well-being. What are the big stressors that seem unique to this time?
We usually separate them into two main types. First, there are life events.
Cook.
Think of these as the acute changes, the sudden, sharp punches to the gut, maybe. They require a lot of adjustment pretty quickly.
Like getting laid off.
Yeah, being unexpectedly laid off or the sudden death of a parent. And we know that events which are major, unexpected, or happen off time, like, say, becoming widowed in your 50s instead of your 80s, those are particularly distressing.
Right, the sudden shock factor. What's the other category?
The second category, and this one's often more insidious, is chronic strains.
Insidious how?
These are the persistent, repeated demands that require adaptation over long stretches of time, like consistently living in poverty or working in a deeply unfulfilling job for years and years, or constantly struggling with bills and debt.
Okay.
Chronic strains are actually often considered more psychologically harmful than those acute events.
Really? More than a sudden shock?
Yeah, because they're just persistent. You often can't easily change them or avoid them. They just drain your resources mentally and emotionally over decades sometimes.
And what feels particularly brutal about midlife is that these things don't just stay in their separate boxes, do they? They seem to pile up, or one leads to another.
Oh, they absolutely do. There's a process sociologists call stress proliferation.
Wait, stress proliferation. So,
Yeah.
like, one bad thing actually causes more bad things. It multiplies.
Essentially, yes, that's a good way to think about it. An initial serious adversity, let's say losing your job or maybe going through a long, demanding period of caregiving, that significantly increases your likelihood of facing other stressors down the line,
Like what?
like subsequent financial strain, obviously, or maybe relationship problems, or even having health conditions start earlier than they otherwise might have.
Wow.
And we see this cascading effect hitting people with fewer socioeconomic resources particularly hard. They just have fewer buffers, fewer safety nets when that first domino falls.
Speaking of things piling up, nothing screams midlife strain quite like family caregiving. Let's talk about the famous sandwich generation.
Yeah, it's a massive source of strain for many. More than half of all caregivers in the U.S. are actually people in midlife.
More than half.
Yep, and those aged 45 to 64, they dedicate, on average, get this, 25 hours of care every single week.
25 hours. That's like a part-time job.
Yeah.
An unpaid part-time job.
Exactly. Half a standard work week, essentially, dedicated to unpaid labor.
And that burden, it's not just about the time commitment, is it?
Oh, no, it's definitely financial, too. Especially for women who still shoulder the bulk of caregiving. It often means cutting back on paid work, maybe even leaving the workforce entirely.
Which hits their long-term security hard.
Absolutely. It incurs a significant financial toll on their retirement savings, their future security. They end up sacrificing future income to manage current family needs. It's a tough spot.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the external stuff, social roles, screams like caregiving, but midlife is also defined by some powerful internal shifts, right? Biological ones. How do hormonal changes fit into this mental health picture?
Right, the internal landscape.
Yeah.
The key transitions here are menopause for women.
Which typically starts when?
Usually kicks in between 45 and 55, and it's not quick. It can last up to a decade, sometimes longer.
Wow.
And then there's andropause in men.
Andropause, for listeners who might be less familiar.
Think of it as a much more gradual, protracted decline in testosterone levels, often starts creeping in around age 40 for men.
Okay. Now, is it fair to say these hormonal shifts cause things like depression?
It's important to be clear here. They might not directly cause mood disorders in a simple A to B way. However, the physical symptoms that often come with these hormonal changes,
So like,
things like persistent fatigue, chronic sleep problems, maybe diminished sex drive, weight gain, those are all physical mechanisms strongly implicated in triggering or worsening depression. Ah, okay. So the fatigue from constantly bad sleep doesn't just make you tired, it actually makes you more vulnerable to mental distress.
precisely. It lowers your resilience.
Yeah.
And adding to this vulnerability, especially for more recent cohorts entering midlife,
People born when?
specifically folks born maybe in the 1960s and later, they're actually showing higher rates of something called multimorbidity.
Multimorbidity, meaning?
It's the presence of two or more chronic health conditions at the same time. Things like heart disease, diabetes, arthritis.
And they're getting these earlier.
Yeah, they seem to be experiencing these major conditions earlier than previous generations did, so more chronic illness and sooner.
And I remember the sources pointed out a sneaky connection here, too. That sometimes the treatments for those chronic illnesses can mess with your mental health.
They absolutely can. It's a known issue. Depression can sometimes be a side effect triggered directly by common medications used for chronic conditions, things like beta blockers for heart issues or corticosteroids for inflammation. So the link between physical and mental health just becomes unavoidable, really, in this age group.
Totally intertwined, yeah.
Okay, so given all these layers of strain, the family stuff, financial worries, the physical changes, the health issues, how are people actually managing this marathon? What about the coping side? What key resources do people often have in midlife?
That's crucial because midlife adults aren't just, collections of risks. They often possess significant strengths, often honed over decades. Two key resources really stand out in the research.
Okay, what's the first?
First is social support. We're talking instrumental help, like rides or meals, emotional support, just having someone listen, and informational assistance, like advice.
And midlife folks tend to have more of this.
Generally, yes. Because
Okay.
midlife is often characterized by long-term relationships, marriages, deep friendships, sibling bonds that have lasted decades. That support network is usually pretty robust and available.
Makes sense. And the second key resource,
The second one is mastery.
mastery. What does that mean exactly?
It's that powerful personal belief that you can control and manage a stressful situation. It's not about like blind confidence. It's more like earned self-efficacy
Earn how?
through experience. Years of navigating career challenges, raising kids, solving complex life problems. It tends to hone your sense of mastery. You've seen difficult situations before and gotten through them.
So it's almost like compound interest on facing challenges. You build up this muscle memory for managing life.
That's a great analogy, exactly. And that sense of mastery offers a direct, really powerful protective effect against the harmful fallout from stress.
How so?
It's what allows you to view, say, a job loss not as a catastrophe that proves you're incapable, but as a setback that, okay, needs a plan. It reframes the challenge.
So what does this all mean? If midlife is this period of heightened structural vulnerability, we're seeing multi-morbidity rising, caregiving stress is huge. How should we translate this knowledge into actual effective support systems, structural ones?
Yeah, that's the key question. We have to recognize that the solutions need to kind of match the complexity of the problems. Since many risk factors are structural and play out over the long term, the solutions probably need to be too.
So thinking bigger picture.
Right. Proactive intervention seems vital. Clinically, this definitely points toward the need for effective psychotherapies, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or interpersonal therapy, IPT, are often mentioned, or sometimes pharmacotherapy, especially for folks dealing with the mental health impacts of chronic illness or its treatments.
And what about tackling that huge external drain we talked about?
Yeah.
Caregiving.
Yes, absolutely crucial. Since the stress from being in that sandwich generation is so profound and widespread, strengthening public supports specifically targeted at family caregivers seems essential.
Like what kind of support?
Could be many things. More accessible respite care, maybe financial relief programs, flexible work policies. These kinds of targeted interventions could really protect the mental health of this vital group.
Yep.
It would allow them to better utilize that mastery and social support they often already have.
Right. So that gives you, our listener, a much more concise but also comprehensive picture of the middle years, doesn't it? Midlife seems less like that sudden, flashy crisis and much more like a marathon navigating chronic, complex stressors, family, financial, biological. But, and this is key, it's also potentially a stage of immense accumulated strength
Deep relationships, yeah.
and that highly honed sense of personal mastery. Hopefully you've gained a clearer picture now of the reality behind that old cultural stereotype.
And, that concept of accumulated resilience, that mastery, it's maybe the most fascinating takeaway for me. It raises a bigger question.
Which is,
Well, if people in midlife often possess such a heightened sense of mastery and these robust social networks built over years of navigating challenges, how can we, as a society, leverage that?
Leverage it how?
how can public policy, maybe community planning, tap into this immense accumulated resilience, not just for boosting individual well-being, which is important, but maybe to collaboratively tackle some of the really big structural issues we're facing now, things like worsening climate-related health risks or improving urban vulnerability. Could that midlife resilience be a resource?
Wow, that suggests the resilience we build up just getting through our middle years could actually be one of society's greatest untapped public resources. That is a truly compelling thought to end on. Okay, that's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.